Hey guys, tonight we journey deep into the cloistered corners and candlelit chambers of a quieter kind of battlefield, one with no blood, no cries of war, and yet a startling amount of scheming. You've just arrived in the inner courtyard of a small medieval keep. The moss-covered stone walls cradle the cool night air. Everything is still, except for the tiny, calculated movements of two men hunched over an inlaid wooden board. Their fingertips brush worn ivory pieces. They don't speak, they don't need to. Every sigh, every glance, every hesitation is a move in itself. You're not watching war, exactly. But this is chess, medieval chess, and you're watching it in its full, velvet-gloved glory. Don't be fooled by the stillness. Underneath these wool cloaks and linen hoods is a fierce, simmering competition. Strategies are unfolding. Honor is at stake. The fate of reputations, marriage prospects, and in rare cases even property holdings could teeter on the edge of a single pawn's advance. And you? You've pulled up a bench. You're here for the whole thing. No swordplay tonight, just mental swordplay. And you probably wouldn't survive this. Not because of the risk. Oh no, the worst injury you'll suffer here is a bruised ego, but because the rules were different, the stakes were strange, and the players were quietly vicious. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, tell me your location and what time it is where you are. I love seeing where this little sleepy circle stretches. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You fold your hands in your lap as the game in front of you ticks onward. Two nobles, one grey-bearded and solemn, the other younger and clearly ambitious, study the board like it's a sacred text. Their robes rustle with every lean forward. You count the candles, 7, one by each corner of the courtyard, 3 on the board itself. The light dances gently across silver goblets and little piles of sweetened figs. This is not a tavern match. This is quiet war. The board is familiar, but not entirely. No black and white squares, these are red and green, or perhaps faded ochre and brown. The pieces are tall with abstract shapes. The king looks suspiciously like a rook in today's game, and the queen is still an advisor, limited in power, but often more strategically protected than her husband. Across the grounds, an elderly scribe watches, occasionally scratching notes into parchment. That's how you know this game matters. It's being recorded. In the world of medieval chess, only games worthy of record were worth remembering. And memory was everything. The air smells of beeswax and baked bread. Occasionally, a hush falls over the courtyard when a servant passes with a tray. Even the dogs seem to understand the solemnity of this moment. The older noble finally moves, a bishop, slantwise, bold. The younger one frowns, just a twitch. You're beginning to see how body language is part of the game. What most people don't know is that chess wasn't always this highbrow. Back in earlier centuries, even suggesting you were a regular player could earn you some side eyes. Historians still argue whether chess in the 11th century was seen as noble refinement or suspicious obsession. The church had a complicated relationship with the game, sometimes praising it as an exercise in virtue, sometimes condemning it as a gateway to sloth and gambling. Like wine, it depended on who was pouring and why. You glance down at the carved set laid out before you now. Each piece carries more weight than its form implies. That night, it represents both real battlefield cavalry and metaphorical leaps over class, over rivals, over rules. That pawn, it's not just a soldier, but a reminder that even the lowborn could advance, though in medieval versions only the farthest forward could ever hope to be promoted, and even that was up for debate. But here's a quirky twist. In certain regions, the pawn wasn't always a foot soldier. Sometimes it was a peasant, a courier, a merchant's apprentice. And on rare occasion, one 12th century manuscript suggested pawns could even represent students, presumably to remind nobles that bookish types might one day outrank you. Not that they needed the reminder. Half the court scribes could probably outmatch their lords in 3 moves flat. You lean back slightly, the stone of the bench cold through your cloak. The younger noble finally moves. His hand hovers, then lands. A knight. It arcs dramatically, leaping over a cluster of pawns, and lands square in the older man's territory. A risky play. The elder doesn't flinch, but you hear a faint sound. An exhale, maybe, or perhaps the ghost of laughter. Somewhere, a bell rings the hour. Midnight. You realize you've been watching for far longer than intended, but that's chess. It bends time, especially in this world. It pulls you in, draws out your focus, and leaves you a little breathless at the thought that all this mental warfare, this polite tension, might still be going on somewhere under candlelight right now. The game is not over, but the moment is sealed in your mind. The quiet of this courtyard has imprinted something deeper than just strategy. It's the realization that history, like chess, is always a little more complicated and a lot more competitive than it seems at first glance. You blink slowly, eyes adjusting to the dim torchlight as the game before you lingers on. The 2 nobles locked in a dance, neither seems eager to end. You stand quietly and drift away from the courtyard, letting the scene fade like parchment curling at the edges. Your journey takes you further back, centuries earlier, to the first time Europe met the strange and angular game we now call chess. You find yourself walking beside a weathered caravan clinking with trade goods, bolts of silk, jars of saffron, and in one carefully guarded bundle, a board carved with geometric precision and pieces shaped like nothing you've seen before. This is the 9th century. You're in the company of merchants and scholars, many of whom are more familiar with Arabic than Latin. They call it shatranj, a Persian evolution of an even older Indian game called chaturanga. As with so many things, the roads of conquest and curiosity have carried chess across mountains and deserts, depositing it gently onto European soil. You crouch next to a Franciscan friar, his robe stained with dust, as he skeptically examines the foreign game. He murmurs about idolatry. The pieces have no faces, which is perhaps for the best. Many early sets were abstract to avoid accusations of vanity or blasphemy. After all, who wants to be excommunicated over a rook? You smile as you watch the friar reluctantly play a few moves, then scowl when he's outmaneuvered. He mutters something about temptation and walks away, only to circle back 5 minutes later, pretending to adjust his sandals. It's always the pious ones who get hooked first. Still, not everyone is convinced. Historians still argue whether early chess was tolerated because it was seen as moral instruction or merely allowed to survive because nobles got bored easily, and this was one of the few things quieter than hawking. You make your way through a Benedictine monastery now, its cold corridors echoing with the slap of sandals and the distant drone of Gregorian chant. One young monk has taken to drawing chess patterns in the margins of religious texts. Tiny horses and towers doodled beside solemn Latin prayers. The abbot isn't pleased, but the young man insists the game sharpens his focus. A silent nod and a knowing glance later, and the abbot joins him for a round after vespers. This was how it began. Chess creeping into Europe not with a shout, but with a whisper. Played in hushed corners behind closed doors, passed from hand to hand like contraband. There was something vaguely dangerous about it, like poetry or astronomy, an activity of clever people who didn't always know when to stop thinking. You pass a scriptorium and notice a curious entry in a monk's journal. He's writing about a match between a visiting Moorish scholar and a local abbot. The scholar won handily, apparently employing a tactic no one in the monastery had seen before. The entry ends with a warning: do not trust the bishop. It never moves how you think it will. You chuckle softly. Still true. As you stroll through time, you notice that the game isn't the only thing evolving. The board, once unadorned, begins to develop richer color. Red and white squares replace the earlier plain ones. Some pieces gain faces. The king grows a bit more dignified, the pawn a little less blocky. Somewhere, a cunning artisan in Cordoba invents the weighted base so that pieces don't fall over during lively debates or wind gusts caused by someone dramatically flipping their cloak. Quirky fact incoming: in 10th century Spain, a chess manual was penned in verse. That's right, poetry about pawns. One stanza even describes how the rook leaps like a fortress unto war, but only straight as the righteous path. Someone took their metaphors very seriously. By the 11th century, chess had become a fashionable accessory among the elite, something you might play after falconry before harp recitals. Entire sets were made of carved walrus ivory, inlaid with precious stones. It wasn't just about playing, it was about displaying. The medieval one-upmanship you didn't know you needed. You catch the scent of lavender oil and parchment as you peek into the satchel of a travelling bishop. Alongside his Book of Hours is a slim, cloth-wrapped chessboard. He claims it helps him contemplate sin and virtue. Judging by the elaborate night trap he's sketching in the margins, it may also help him destroy his opponents with terrifying precision. At this point, you begin to see the glimmer of what chess would become in Europe. Not just a game, but a cultural flex. To play it well meant you were disciplined, learned, and possessed of inner control. To play it poorly, well, that just meant you were probably going to pretend you hated it anyway. You finally pause beside a small wooden table outside a church. A boy, barefoot, shirt oversized, carefully mimics moves he's seen a nobleman make. His board is scratched into the dirt, and his pieces are pebbles and broken stick ends. But the logic? The battle? It's all there. You realize the game is changing the people just as much as the people are changing the game. The smell of ink and beeswax thickens as you duck into the low archway of a medieval scriptorium. It's dim, save for the flicker of a half-spent candle resting dangerously close to a rolled-up vellum scroll. You hear the rhythmic scratch of a quill, the gentle sighs of monks bent over their desks. But tonight, there's something else murmuring between the walls. Not scripture, not psalms, strategy. You inch closer and catch two monks whispering in Latin-inflected French, huddled over a wooden chessboard beside a codex of St. Augustine. One of them, thin with spectacles perched halfway down his nose, is tapping a pawn, almost like it might suddenly confess something. The other leans back and mutters, You'll regret that. He sounds more like a baker defending his oven than a man of God. This is where the game truly settled in, among books, parchment, and prayer. In monasteries across Europe, chess became a pastime cloaked in justification. It wasn't just a distraction, it was, depending on who you asked, a metaphor for life's moral order. Each piece had its role: the king, authority; the bishop, faith; the knight, chivalry; and the pawn, humility, or possibly servitude. Depends on which abbey you're asking. Historians still argue whether monks genuinely believed chess made them more virtuous, or just needed a clever excuse to avoid mending sandals for a few hours. Either way, the game flourished in these cloistered walls. You crouch beside a young novice, sketching tiny chessboards in the margin of a biblical manuscript. He's left a note to himself. Queen may not move as bishop. Brother Anselm disagrees. Debates like this went on for weeks. One abbot even commissioned a full treatise on the movement of rooks, only to find out 2 chapters in that he had miscopied the starting square. That manuscript now resides in a dusty corner labelled Puzzles and Minor Heresies. And speaking of puzzles, chess problems became the monk's version of Sudoku. Imagine a parchment labelled Mate in 2, hand-drawn beside an illuminated vine border, nestled between an allegory on temperance and a doodle of a suspiciously smug knight piece. These puzzles weren't just idle amusements, they were exercises in logic, meant to sharpen the mind, or at least justify long evenings near the warmer side of the library. One fringe fact: in a monastery in southern Italy, monks once held a tournament where the prize was a goose. Not roasted, alive. The winning brother was reportedly delighted and named the goose Rook. You move further into the chamber and observe the subtle hierarchy that's emerged around the game. Older monks always play white. Juniors defer without protest, even when clearly better. Chess, it seems, mirrors not just warfare but the monastery's own structure: orderly, silent, and ruled by someone who may or may not understand what's going on. But beneath that surface calm, things simmer. You hear the scrape of a stool as Brother Hugo loses a match for the 3rd time that week. He mutters something about divine punishment and storms out. Another monk calmly repositions the pieces for the next game, while the scribe quietly records Hugo's losing streak in the margins of the abbey's game ledger, right beside the bread inventory. Divine justice in carbs and captures. Not all monasteries embraced the game, of course. Some regarded it with the same suspicion reserved for dice or overly rhythmic music. One Cistercian order banned chess outright, arguing it invited envy and pride. Another famously allowed it, but only if no one laughed or spoke during the game. That version quickly became known as the most depressing chess club in Europe. Still, the game endured, not because it was fun, though it absolutely was, but because it offered something monks rarely got: quiet conflict. A way to compete without sinning, a way to prove one's intellect without a single raised voice. And maybe, just maybe, a way to feel victorious in a world where nearly everything was predetermined. You watch a game unfold, a bishop diagonally encroaching, a knight leaping across lines like some stubborn theological argument. The tension is thick enough to slice with a quill. Then, checkmate, a win, a soft nod. No exclamations, just the satisfied flick of a sleeve as the victor returns to his illuminated manuscript like nothing happened. Of course, some monks took things further. One Benedictine was said to have hidden coded messages in his chess puzzles, warnings about an impending tax hike. Another taught a rook-to-rook opening so controversial it was banned in his abbey under the name the Heretical Castle. That one's probably apocryphal. But then again, so is half the monastery gossip. You trail a monk into the cloisters, where the columns throw long shadows over the worn flagstones. He's clutching a tiny travel board built into the back of a prayer book. He sits under an arch, opens the board, and begins to play against himself. You realize now this isn't just a game. For some, it's meditation. For others, confession. And for more than a few, it's the only way to win something in a life dedicated to losing ego. And as you step back out into the chilly air, you think, maybe chess wasn't invented for kings and nobles after all. Maybe it was made for the quietly competitive, the ones who say little, think much, and leave their opponents whispering to themselves in the dark. You rub your hands together, warming your fingers, as you walk briskly down a cobbled street in a bustling medieval town. The year is somewhere around 1175. The bells of a distant abbey chime midday. But here, in the shadow of a stone guild hall, something quite different from prayer is unfolding. A wooden placard sways in the breeze above a doorway, its hand-painted with a simple symbol, a chessboard flanked by two golden lions. Beneath it, a low murmur hums from within. You push open the door and step into the thick air of sawdust, spiced wine, and expectation. You've arrived at one of the earliest recorded chess tournaments in Northern Europe. And no, it's not as grand as you might imagine. There are no banners waving, no applause. Just 30 or so men gathered inside a warm, torchlit hall, each seated at their own table, eyeing their opponents with narrowed eyes and raised brows. Some wear silk, others wear wool. There are aging knights and young scribes. A few players roll prayer beads between moves. All of them are sweating, not from physical exertion, but from the pressure of playing for honor in a time when reputation could shape the course of your life. The silence is heavy. You take a seat near the edge of the room, trying not to breathe too loudly. Each table has a different set. Some boards are plain, others carved intricately with spiraling vines. The pieces don't match either. One set has falcons as rooks, another, tiny unicorns instead of knights. Medieval imagination is a strange and glorious thing. At the front of the room stands a tall figure in a red doublet. He's the arbiter, although no one calls him that yet. He paces slowly, making sure no one is cheating or praying for divine intervention mid-match. The latter isn't technically against the rules, but it's frowned upon unless you're losing spectacularly. You lean in to watch a game in progress. A rotund merchant is playing against a much leaner, younger nobleman. The merchant is biting his lip. The nobleman stares straight ahead, eyes darting once every few seconds, like a hawk waiting for the slightest movement. The game is halfway through and you notice something strange. The merchant keeps whispering numbers. He's counting squares, calculating. The nobleman, he's humming softly, a church hymn. You're witnessing not just a match of intellect, but a clash of mindsets, mathematics versus instinct. Suddenly the nobleman moves. His rook slides across the board with the finality of a slammed door. Check. The merchant freezes. You can see his fingers twitch. He looks down, then up, and with the weary expression of someone who just remembered they forgot to salt the stew, he tips his king. The crowd around him, silent until now, nods in quiet approval. Here's the thing. There were no official ranking systems, no ELO ratings. You gained respect by word of mouth, by how you handled defeat, by how many nobles remembered your name the next morning. And those first tournaments, they were raw. Players whispered strategy in Latin, feigned illness mid-match, and occasionally claimed divine visions when losing. Historians still argue whether one early champion truly saw the Virgin Mary guiding his bishop or just had indigestion. Quirky fact for you, in a 12th century tournament in Normandy, it's recorded that a player bribed a candleboy to breathe heavily near his opponent's ear. Distraction by exhalation. Honestly, a clever tactic. Back in the room, you spot a trio of onlookers gathered around a smaller side table. One is sketching every move, the other is whispering commentary, and the third, he's just here for the food. Chess, in medieval Europe, was becoming more than just a pastime. It was a spectator event. A quiet one, sure, but drama, it was absolutely there. You hear a commotion at the far end. Someone's upended a board. A knight has gone flying. The loser, a well-dressed courtier, insists the rules have been twisted. The winner, a stone-faced cleric, simply folds his arms and waits. The arbiter approaches, sighs, and smooths his beard before declaring, "If you did not know the rules before you lost, it is not the board's fault." That one-liner would later be copied into a handbook of tournament etiquette. You wander among the competitors between matches, noticing rituals. One player whispers to each piece before moving. Another never touches the board with his right hand. Superstition and chess, they go hand in hand. One night, Sir Raoul of Lille is said to carry a small, dried frog's leg for luck. You don't ask why. Some things are better left unexplained. As the rounds progress, tension thickens. There are no trophies, but there is prestige. Some tournaments promised land grants, or even arranged marriages as reward. Others simply granted you the right to stand behind a duke during royal matches and say things like, "Ah, yes, I taught him that gambit." You watch a final match unfold. It's past midnight now. The fire's dying, but the room still glows with intensity. A young woman has joined the crowd, disguised in her brother's cloak, no doubt. She follows each move with barely concealed excitement, fingers twitching at imaginary pieces in her lap. The match ends with a queen's sacrifice, bold, unexpected, and beautiful. The room exhales as one, and you think chess wasn't born as a battlefield. But in this dim, smoky hall, it has become one. A battlefield of nerves, etiquette, long grudges, and brief moments of genius. The tables are cleared, the players retire, some grumbling, others serene. The nobleman who lost quietly slips his purse to a servant. The merchant who won, he walks out with his head held high. No cheers, no trumpets, just the quiet understanding that something significant just happened. The smell of wood smoke fades behind you as you leave the tournament hall and wander into the foggy garden of a royal residence. This one, you soon realize, belongs to a minor French duchess, a woman of taste, political savvy, and a fierce preference for opening with her king's pawn. You know, as one does. Tonight, a match is already underway under the open sky. Lanterns sway gently from carved posts, and a fine wooden table rests at the garden centre, surrounded by ivy-covered walls and stone benches. The air is thick with honeysuckle and tension. At the table sits the Duchess herself, wrapped in a fur-lined cloak, brows furrowed in concentration. Across from her is her cousin, young, bored-looking but clever. The two are locked in a match that's already spilled 2 goblets of wine and 1 poorly worded insult. You take a seat nearby and begin to grasp an uncomfortable truth. Chess in the royal courts was not always serene. In fact, it was often dangerously entangled with ego, power, and the delicate fabric of noble alliances. There's a reason people didn't just let the king win. Kings, queens, dukes, they all wanted to win, on their own terms, and woe to the poor soul who misjudged when to hold back and when to press for mate. Take, for example, the legendary tale of King Alfonso the Wise of Castile. He loved chess so deeply he commissioned the Libro de los Juegos, a beautifully illustrated book on the game in the 13th century. But don't let the name fool you. This wasn't just a playful manual. It was serious business, blending game theory with philosophy, astronomy, and a quiet hint that maybe losing to him wasn't wise, at least not twice in a row. Historians still argue whether royal courts used chess as subtle political maneuvering or just took it far too seriously because they lacked the internet. One courtier's letter complains that he was exiled to the stables after beating a prince too quickly. Another describes a duke accusing his opponent of spiritual dishonesty for trapping his rook too early. But you're witnessing something far more intimate now. The Duchess leans forward, tracing a finger along the bishop's path. Her cousin watches with a smile that is definitely not warm. She moves her piece, sliding it diagonally between two pawns. Check. The cousin knocks over his goblet. Accidental? Possibly. Strategic delay? More likely. Here's a delicious detail. In many royal courts, throwing a tantrum mid-game was technically considered beneath one's station, but was often indulged. After all, if a duke wants to pout and kick over the board, are you going to stop him? One account from the court of Burgundy tells of a marquis who flipped the board and demanded a rematch, then did the same thing again when he lost that match. The third game was played in silence, and the marquis mysteriously won. The opponent, he'd been sent to supervise drainage construction for a few months, coincidence. But despite the dramatics, chess was seen as essential training for rulership. A prince who understood chess was praised for mastering patience, foresight, and risk. A queen who played well could disarm ambassadors without words. Strategy on the board echoed strategy in the throne room. There's even a rare 14th century etiquette book that dedicates an entire chapter to proper reactions to unexpected checkmate in public settings. Tip number 4. Feign deep admiration, then cough gently and request a drink. Sage advice. But not everyone played fair. A court favourite in Naples was caught smuggling extra pawns into his sleeve. When asked why, he said he believed in giving himself a mercantile advantage. The Duchess reportedly laughed, then banned him from play for a year. That was mercy by royal standards. You shift slightly on your bench, heart oddly engaged in the match still unfolding before you. The Duchess has sacrificed her knight. A bold play, one that will either pay off spectacularly or cost her the whole game. Her cousin raises an eyebrow. The servants nearby hold their breath. One of them whispers, "Not again!" And then in 3 neat moves, she traps his king. Checkmate. There's no applause, only silence. Then the cousin sighs, stands, and bows ever so slightly. The Duchess smiles, slow and smug. She doesn't gloat. That would be beneath her. Instead, she calls for another round of wine and invites him to sit. If he dares. You smile too, because now you understand. In the royal courts, chess was never just a game. It was a language, one where alliances were tested, rivalries whispered, and power, however momentarily, could shift from one side of the board to the other. And as you rise from your seat and turn to leave the garden, the laughter of the Duchess echoes behind you. Not cruel, not mocking, just a reminder that sometimes, even in kingdoms built on swords, The sharpest weapon was carved from ivory and moved silently across a checkered board. The laughter fades as you slip away from the Duchess's garden, weaving your way down a narrow corridor lined with tapestries and echoes. The torches flicker against stone walls, casting chessboard-shaped shadows as you step into another room, this one filled not with nobles or monks, but something altogether more exciting. Historians still argue exactly when it happened, but at some point between the 12th and 15th centuries, something curious took place on the board, a quiet revolution. One piece changed forever. You watch it unfold now, right before your eyes. The moment the queen became the most powerful force in the game. In earlier chess variants, the queen wasn't really a queen. She was the furs, or advisor, able to move only one square diagonally. A cautious, restrained, thoroughly underwhelming piece. Think glorified pawn with a fancy title. But somewhere in medieval Europe, most likely Spain or Italy, someone had had enough of that. You find yourself seated in a dimly lit chamber filled with hushed conversation and clinking goblets. A group of aristocrats lounges around a richly embroidered chessboard. They're toying with a new version of the rules. In this one, the queen can move any number of squares in any direction. The table grows quiet as this is demonstrated with a flourish. A young woman with sharp eyes makes the move. The queen slices across the board like lightning. Everyone leans forward. A knight is taken. A rook trembles. A new era is dawning. Some historians suggest this powerful transformation was inspired by the rise of strong royal women, Eleanor of Aquitaine, Isabella of Castile. Others claim it was simply a gameplay tweak to speed things up. But one tantalizing theory: a female player insisted on the change during a noble tournament and refused to play unless the queen reflected her actual influence at court. A scandalous and utterly delightful footnote in chess lore. What's not debated is this: once the new rules spread, they stuck, and the game was never the same. You lean over the board, watching the new queen move again, diagonally, horizontally, vertically, like a storm with perfect posture. Players gasp, strategies collapse, openings must be rewritten. Suddenly, the quiet little game of kings has a new queen, and she's not here to play nice. Some resisted. There were treatises written against the change. One 15th century monk denounced the unnatural liberty of the queen's movement and demanded a return to more measured behavior. Another called her a witch of the board. That monk later lost 6 consecutive games and reportedly took up backgammon instead. You pass through another parlor, this one filled with painted ceilings and lute music. The board at the center is covered in rose petals. A match is being played by candlelight between a Venetian merchant's daughter and a foreign diplomat. The queen piece glows under the candlelight, and you can feel it. This isn't just chess anymore. This is spectacle. The woman wins in 17 moves. The diplomat is clearly smitten. She nods politely and asks if he wants to try again. He does. And here's a quirky tidbit for your dreams tonight. In one Spanish ballad from the 1400s, a courtship story is told entirely through the metaphor of a chess game, with the suitor trying to capture the queen's heart, only to be repeatedly outmaneuvered. He loses, and in the end, the queen mates him with mercy. There's something charmingly symbolic about it, even if the rhymes are questionable. As you watch the pieces return to their squares, a small crowd gathers to discuss what this means for the future of the game. Some are elated, the faster pace, the new tactics. The thrill of having one piece capable of altering the entire board in an instant. Others mutter about tradition and the good old days of diagonal-only dignity. You can't help but feel the shift too. Chess, like all things, is evolving, and this one change has transformed the experience from slow contemplation to razor-sharp elegance. It has also quietly mirrored the shifting roles of women in society, at least among those wealthy and powerful enough to play the game at all. Outside, a breeze rustles through the trees, and a poet nearby reads a sonnet aloud to a small audience. You catch only a few lines. The king, he waits. The knights, they charge, but the queen, oh, she dances, swift and large. Not bad. You walk past another board. A young girl, maybe 12, is teaching her father how the queen moves now. He furrows his brow, skeptical. She wins in 4 moves. He nods solemnly, then asks for a rematch. It's a quiet kind of revolution, this transformation. No bloodshed, no uprisings, just a subtle rule change whispered across salons and parlours until every board across Europe is tilted ever so slightly in a new direction. And from this moment on, every match you witness will feel different, because now there's a piece on the board that isn't just strong, it's unstoppable in the right hands. The wind shifts as you step into a stone cloister perched high above the valley. Bells toll distantly from the town below, but here the only sound is the soft tick of wooden pieces and the occasional sharp sigh of frustration. You're in the private quarters of a bishop, a real one, not carved from ivory. He's pacing slowly, brows furrowed, lips pressed thin. Across from him sits an abbess, hands folded neatly in her lap. The game between them is in its final stages, and neither seems particularly holy at the moment. This is not prayer, this is rivalry with incense. You slide into the shadows to observe, careful not to disturb the tension. The bishop halts, glares, moves his knight. The abbess cocks her head, clearly unimpressed. She lifts her queen, yes, the newly empowered queen, and in one swift move, slashes through the bishop's hopeful defense. Checkmate. She does not smile. She simply stands, bows slightly, and exits with the serene grace of someone who's done this many times before. And you realize something curious is unfolding in this room, something the church has never quite made up its mind about. You see, in the medieval world, chess was increasingly popular, but its morality, questionable. Church leaders frequently debated whether it was a noble pursuit of intellect or a dangerous distraction that tempted pride and vanity. Historians still argue whether ecclesiastical bans on chess were truly enforced or just half-hearted scoldings written into dusty scrolls. One synod in 1208 banned chess outright for clergy, citing ungodly competitiveness. Another in 1254 merely advised that bishops refrain from gambling on their matches, but helpfully provided a list of acceptable stakes, including livestock and manuscripts, because nothing screams holy discipline like winning a donkey for cornering someone's king. In some orders, playing chess was only allowed during certain seasons, specifically when sin was considered less likely to escalate, whatever that means. In others, chess was classified with games like dice and cards, suspicious, secular, and dangerously fun. You duck into a side chamber now where a pair of junior monks is playing with pieces carved from riverstone. The board is etched into a low table. They whisper as they play, eyes darting toward the heavy curtain that separates them from the abbot's chambers. One of them mutters, "He says it leads to pride." The other responds without looking up, "Then he shouldn't have lost last week." You suppress a chuckle. The game, clearly, is not going anywhere. Bans may be written, but the boards remain. Still, the controversy was real. In one letter preserved in a Roman archive, a frustrated cardinal laments that half his clergy would rather debate whether pawns should promote to bishops than transcribe actual sermons. Another furious friar warned that chess dulled the soul and sharpened the tongue. Not entirely wrong. And then there's the infamous papal pawn incident. You find yourself back in a grand study where a scribe nervously recounts a tale. Pope Innocent III, while attending a court function, allegedly chastised a cardinal for wasting hours on a chess match when souls were waiting. The cardinal, unfazed, challenged him to a game. The Pope declined, but only because my strategy is eternal and yours ends at checkmate. It's unclear if this was clever rhetoric or passive-aggressive dodge. Either way, the story endured. Quirky fact time. In some illuminated manuscripts, bishops are portrayed not as elegant, diagonal-moving rooks, but as literal bishops, mitred, staff-wielding, and occasionally squinting at their own rules. A marginal illustration from 1315 shows a bishop piece arguing with a pawn. The pawn, unironically, is wearing sandals. You walk the perimeter of the cloister and find a hidden alcove. A small board is set up on a windowsill overlooking the gardens. No players, just a half-finished game. You study the arrangement. White's queen is in danger. Black's knight is oddly advanced. It looks like the beginning of a trap or the end of an argument. The air smells of rosemary and rain-damp stone. It hits you quietly. Chess in these walls became more than just entertainment. It was meditation, rebellion, even theology in motion. A way for cloistered minds to explore consequences without stepping outside the abbey walls. Each move, a question, each strategy, a silent sermon. You peer into a storage room now filled with old scrolls, broken candle molds, and tucked, in the back, a velvet-lined box. Inside, a chess set with pieces so worn they barely hold their shapes. This set has seen years, maybe decades of play, each corner scuffed, each pawn smoothed by countless hands. No treasure, and yet somehow priceless. You close the lid gently and retreat once more into the open air. The abbess from earlier passes by. She offers you a faint smile. You nod in return. In a world of strict rules, confessionals, and unchanging liturgies, there was one space where creativity, risk, and cunning could flourish. Silently, respectfully, but without mercy. And it was played on 64 squares. The scent of roasting chestnuts follows you as you descend from the cloisters and out into the thrum of a medieval market square. Gone are the velvet robes and polished goblets. Here the world bustles with raw energy, traders bartering in 3 languages, children darting between wheelbarrows and the unmistakable clatter of hooves on stone. You wind through the noise until you find it. A modest wooden table set between 2 barrels, shielded from the wind by a patchy cloth canopy. 2 men sit opposite each other, elbows on the table, scowling at a well-worn chessboard. The pieces are crude, whittled from spare wood or repurposed buttons, but the concentration? Deadly serious. These aren't monks or dukes. These are merchants, shopkeepers, cobblers perhaps. And yet they are just as locked into their match as any nobleman in a silk doublet. By the 13th and 14th centuries, chess had trickled down from the high halls into the towns. No longer exclusive to aristocrats, it became a pastime of the literate merchant class, the emerging middle tier of medieval society. Historians still argue whether this democratization of chess made it more strategic, or more superstitious. One thing's for sure, it made it louder. You lean on a barrel and watch the game unfold. One player, red-faced and slightly wine-scented, mutters calculations under his breath. The other keeps reaching to stroke his beard every time he moves a bishop. Patterns, habits, rituals, they all count. Around them a small crowd gathers. A butcher places a bet on the bearded one. A fishmonger objects, claiming the other has a killer pawn game. Yes, chess has gone public. You walk further down the alley and find another board, this one laid out on a tavern table inside a smoky room filled with pipe smoke and laughter. Here, the atmosphere is rowdier. Moves are punctuated by clinks of tankards and shouts of, "Didn't see that coming, did you?" Someone loses their queen and demands a rematch. Someone else offers unsolicited advice from 3 feet away. 3 feet. The bartender keeps score with tally marks etched into the woodwork. And here's your quirky tidbit of the evening. In some towns, chess matches were used as tiebreakers in business disputes. One preserved guild document from Lübeck notes a case where 2 textile merchants, arguing over a shipment delay, agreed to settle the matter over 3 games of chess. The winner walked away with exclusive rights to the market stall. The loser had to wear a tunic stitched with a pawn emblem for a full week. Humiliating, yes, but also strangely efficient. You begin to see patterns. At a spice stall, 2 apprentices play between customers. On the steps of a cathedral, a grizzled soldier coaches a young boy through his first game. Even in the corners of the brothel district you pass through quickly, chessboards are visible, often half-played, often surrounded by laughter. Strategy, after all, doesn't care where you sleep. One narrow lane opens up to a courtyard where a tournament of sorts is taking place, not for nobles, not for titles, for bragging rights, and maybe a free dinner. A cloth canopy covers the playing area, and someone has drawn chalk lines across the cobblestones to keep the crowd back. Players are introduced by name and sometimes nicknames: One-Eyed Thomas, Griselda the Fast, and Martin the Miserable. The audience roars when Griselda wins a match in under 5 minutes using a sneaky queen maneuver. You chuckle. Medieval middle-class chess wasn't subtle. It was practical, impatient, and packed with character. And it fit perfectly into a world where merchants needed to plan trade routes, haggle over grain weights, and guess whether the Flemish guilds would raise tariffs by spring. Because make no mistake, this wasn't just a game to them. Chess was training. How to read your opponent, how to wait, how to sacrifice now to win later. It was a perfect mirror of merchant life. You find yourself beside a weaver now, her fingers stained with indigo. She's playing against a cooper with a large nose and larger ego. They say nothing as they play. The board between them is etched into a scrap of discarded wood. Every move is deliberate, calculated, and strangely beautiful. The weaver wins. The cooper grumbles, mutters something about unfair bishops, and stalks off. She rolls her eyes and resets the pieces. Behind you, someone says, "She's never lost 3 in a row." You smile. A local legend, perhaps. Every town needs one. You pause beside a wall where someone scrawled a rough drawing of a board and left a puzzle challenge. White to move and win in 2. Below it, someone has scribbled a solution. And below that, someone else has crossed it out and added, "Idiot." You step away, amused. The game has taken on a life of its own. It no longer belongs to kings or clerics. It belongs to everyone who wants to outthink their neighbor or prove their worth without lifting a sword. And as dusk rolls in, you realize something profound. In a world full of chaos, plague, taxes, and bad bread, chess offered something rare. A quiet moment, a choice, and the knowledge that if you played well enough, if you planned just right, you could win, even when the odds said otherwise. The lamps are lit now, casting golden pools of light onto cobbled streets as the sky deepens into a dusky blue. You follow the flicker of torchlight down a winding alleyway toward a crooked little inn, the kind that leans into itself like it's whispering secrets to the ground. Inside, laughter crackles, mugs clink, and near the hearth, two men sit hunched over a battered chessboard, one with a suspiciously smug expression, the other suspicious period. You take a seat near the fire, its warmth crawling up your sleeves, and observe what has become a familiar scene. But tonight, something's off. The smug player moves a rook with uncharacteristic confidence. His opponent scowls, narrows his eyes, and says nothing. A few moves later, though, you see it happen. The smug player's hand hovers over a pawn. He glances sideways, his thumb twitches, and just like that, the pawn jumps one square farther than it legally should. You raise an eyebrow. He's cheating. Yes, chess, even in the medieval age, was not safe from the tricksters and sly folk who saw opportunity in silence. The game may have been noble, but players were human, and humans, especially when ale and pride are involved, tend to bend rules like soft wax. Historians still argue whether medieval chess cheating was widespread or just folklore exaggerated by bitter losers. What's clear is that by the 14th century, manuscripts began including not just strategies, but etiquette warnings. Play in daylight, count the pieces before and after. One even states bluntly, if your opponent leans far over the board, check your queen. You stifle a laugh as the cheated player finally speaks up. "You've moved that pawn twice in one turn," he says calmly. The room goes quiet. The accused shrugs. "You blinked." Not a denial, not quite. An older woman by the fire scoffs. That's his third offence this week. Apparently, medieval pubs had regulars and reputations. But chess wasn't only cheated in motion, sometimes it was cheated in design. You walk past a vendor's stall the next morning where boards are sold beside dice and cards. One chess set has slightly uneven pieces, carefully carved so a player could identify them by touch under the table. Another has hidden symbols etched on the bottom, coded signals for an accomplice. Even the merchant smirks when asked about it. "I sell to winners," he says. Quirky fact. In one documented case from Bruges, a disgruntled bishop accused a rival of bewitching the board. No evidence of actual sorcery was found, but the accused did win 17 games in a row, including one where he checkmated using only 4 pieces. Suspicious? Certainly. Magical? Probably not. But it earned him the nickname Lucifer's Gambit. Of course, cheating wasn't always so overt. Sometimes it was subtle manipulation, coughing when your opponent reached for the right square, placing a tankard just close enough to obscure the board's edge, or loudly complimenting someone's completely wrong. Move in hopes they'd commit to it. You pass through another town and find a different kind of game underway, a chess duel. Not just for pride, but for settling a legal matter. A travelling magistrate oversees the match. The accused sits across from the plaintiff, each flanked by local elders. The loser must pay a fine or spend the next 2 market days standing on a crate, reading aloud the laws on proper poultry taxation. The tension is palpable, and yet everyone knows one illegal move, one misstep, one unfair advantage, and the match loses meaning. Reputation in these matters is everything, which is why chivalry also flourished in chess. You see it time and again, players admitting errors before being caught, offering rematches after lucky wins, even conceding games where victory came by a fluke. These moments mattered. In some guilds, players who refused to offer rematches were quietly uninvited from future games. You duck into a cloistered inn now where two grizzled knights are finishing a match. One has clearly won, but instead of crowing, he gently resets the board and says, "Let's try that again. No surprises this time." The other smiles faintly. They play in silence. That, too, is chivalry. But the best moments, the ones worth remembering, are the quiet, human ones, like the time a blind man in Milan played a full game using memory alone. Or the carpenter who carried his queen piece everywhere as a good luck charm. Or the little boy in Prague who spotted a mate in 3 and earned free bread for a week from the local baker who never quite recovered from the loss. You pause at a street corner and see a small boy playing with his grandfather. The old man makes a theatrical blunder. The boy gasps. "You let me win," he accuses. "Yes," the old man replies, "but only just. That's chess. Not just war on a board, but theatre, trust, wit, and occasionally a trick or two under the sleeve. You walk on, the night stretching around you. Somewhere behind, a tankard slams, a pawn is sacrificed, and a whisper says, "You can't do that." The reply, "I already did." The chill of the evening deepens as you make your way down a muddy road that twists through rolling hills and windswept fields. Your boots are caked in earth, your cloak damp with mist. But in the distance, you spot a flickering lantern swaying gently from a cart hitched beside a small, mossy inn. Inside, the air is thick with pipe smoke, wet wool, and anticipation. Tonight, you aren't among nobles or town merchants. Tonight, you trail the footsteps of travelling chess masters, those curious, cloaked figures who drifted from town to town like wandering minstrels, carrying not loots, but boards, strategies, and just the faintest air of mystery. You slip through the inn door as a gust of wind follows you in. There, by the hearth, sits one of them. He's older, wrapped in a patched cloak, hands rough from the road, but eyes sharp as tacks. Before him, a portable chess set unfolds, simple wooden pieces tucked neatly into a folding board lined with velvet. Across from him, a miller nervously fingers his beard. The match has just begun. You settle onto a low stool nearby. No one introduces the master by name, but everyone in the room knows who he is. He's played in Bruges, Barcelona, Vienna. Some say he once bested a bishop in 3 moves. Others whisper that he learned to play from a Moorish scholar who wrote strategies in ciphered verse. Whether any of it is true hardly matters. His presence is enough. This, you realize, was a real thing. Long before grandmasters and rating systems, medieval Europe had its own network of travelling chess savants. Historians still argue whether they were revered as geniuses or dismissed as charming nuisances. But the best of them earned real rewards, meals, lodging, and sometimes even patrons. You lean in as the master moves. It's fluid, fast, and entirely unexpected. The miller grunts, already on the defensive. The match unfolds quietly. The master's fingers hover just above the board, like he's listening to the pieces breathe. You begin to notice he's keeping a tiny parchment notebook at his side. Occasionally, he jots something down, just a symbol or two, a move, a reaction, a thought, his own secret archive of games. And here's a quirky delight. Some of these travelling masters did create personal chess journals, filled not only with game records but also commentary, doodles, coded annotations and margin notes like "drinks too much wine, predictable after third pawn push." You glance at the master's sleeve and notice something stitched along the edge. Tiny runes, perhaps, or a mnemonic for openings. Some players tattooed strategies onto their arms, others hid diagrams under false book covers. One even etched patterns into the underside of his belt. Paranoia or dedication, maybe both. He checkmates the miller in 16 moves, no boast, no bow, just a nod. The board resets and another challenger steps up. Some masters refused to play more than 3 matches per town. Others insisted on silence during play or demanded a small silver coin to even consider your request. One even made opponents declare their intent to learn, to win, or to humble oneself. If you answered all 3, you earned a smile. If you said to win, you might be ignored entirely. You ask quietly if he's ever played in the court at Avignon. A nearby farmer whispers back, "He beat a cardinal there." Barely escaped. Another nods. He played blindfolded once, 5 boards at once, took all 5 games. Historians still debate the authenticity of these tales, but one thing is certain: these masters had style. Whether they arrived in stormcoats or wool tunics, they left behind a trail of stories, strategies, and scratched wooden boards. Outside, the wind howls against the shutters. Inside, the master plays his 3rd match of the night, this time against a woman who's clearly no stranger to the game. The match is tight. You see her set a trap, and he avoids it by a whisker. Their eyes meet. She smiles, just barely. A worthy opponent. This is what he's come for. It ends with a draw. The room erupts, not in cheers, but in that low hum of respectful awe. She nods, he bows. The pieces go back into the board, the latches snap shut. And just like that he stands, cloak, pack, lantern, gone. By the time you step outside, the only thing left is the warm memory of calculation, elegance, and the soft scrape of wooden pieces dancing across a battlefield of squares. You follow his path just a few paces as the road curls into the fog. Somewhere ahead, another town waits, another match, another legend in the making, because that's what these travelers carried, not just tactics or puzzles, but the quiet magic of a game that needed no language, no translation, just minds, boards, and the hush that falls when the queen glides diagonally across the board and changes everything. You wake to birdsong and a breeze, the kind that smells of parchment, fresh bread, and maybe just a bit of chalk dust. The sun has risen over a quiet village in the lowlands, where the schoolhouse is nothing more than a single stone room beside a chapel. And yet, something curious stirs within its walls. You ease open the creaking door and step inside, not into a lesson on Latin or crop rotations, but into a silent moment of intense focus. At the center of the room is a long wooden bench worn smooth by generations of elbows. Atop it lies a scroll, not one of scripture or science, but of riddles, chess riddles. Yes, chess problems, as they were called, had taken on a life of their own in the later medieval period. Not just matches between players, but puzzles designed to torment the brain, tease logic, and, if you believe the whispers, determine the limits of human cleverness itself. You draw closer. The scroll is laid open to a challenge. White to move, mate in 2, the knight must leap, the king must stew. Poetry? Yes. Torture? Certainly. A boy no older than 10 frowns at the diagram sketched in ink. His teacher, a stooped old man with a ribbon of chalk dust down his front, watches with interest. You crouch beside them, noting the puzzle's elegance. The solution is there, just not obvious. Like most good chess problems, it requires a kind of sideways thinking. You don't solve it so much as see it. These problems were a full-blown genre by the 14th century, appearing in manuscripts, books of hours, even leisure books kept in noble households. Historians still argue whether their purpose was pedagogical, devotional, or simply a very genteel form of masochism. Some suggest they were used to train military minds. Others think they were meditative tools for cloistered scholars who needed a break from theology. Either way, you're hooked. One particularly infamous scroll, now lost but referenced in several letters, contained a problem so complex it took one abbot 2 full winters to solve. He did, allegedly, and then burned the scroll to prevent future suffering. An overreaction, maybe, but you get it. And here's a quirky gem, a chess problem written entirely in illuminated manuscript form, complete with gold leaf and a margin illustration of 2 bishops arguing with a horse, that is, presumably, a knight. You glance around the room. Several other scrolls are laid out, some in Latin, others in the vernacular. Each one presents a challenge, and each has a tiny note beside it, left by previous solvers. One says, "Solved after evening prayer." Another simply reads, "Still haunted by this." There's a strange camaraderie to it, a quiet community of minds across time, nodding in frustrated agreement. You trace your finger along one particularly thorny problem. It's subtle. The queen must be sacrificed early, then a pawn advance, then... Ah, you smile, that's clever. And it occurs to you, these problems aren't just exercises, they're stories, tiny narratives hidden in patterns, traps laid for your expectations. A mate in 2 might be an ambush, a fork in the center might be a feint. Each one reveals something, not about chess, but about you. You step outside the schoolhouse and wander into a nearby marketplace where, surprise, more problems await. One stall displays riddles written on scraps of hide, sold for a few copper coins. "Challenge your friends," the seller cries, "or your enemies." A baker glances over, buys one, and tucks it into her apron. She'll think about it while kneading dough. That's how this works now. The problems live everywhere, even in the corner of the tavern where a group of elders debates the solution to a puzzle involving only pawns. Someone says it's impossible. Someone else insists their cousin solved it drunk with a spoon. Proof is lacking. You pause before a church wall where someone has scratched a chessboard into the stone and added a curious challenge. King alone, mate in 3, no queens allowed. Bold. Impossible? You're not sure. But it will certainly keep you thinking for the next few hours. And that's the point. These problems are quiet echoes. Little challenges left behind like breadcrumbs, no fanfare, no trophies. Just the satisfaction of a well-played line, and maybe a smirk if someone else gets stumped where you triumphed. As the sun sinks toward the hills, you find yourself beneath a tree with a scroll in hand. The diagram is intricate, the solution elusive. You close your eyes for a moment, breathe, and imagine the pieces moving. You see the queen dance. The bishop cut a diagonal like a whisper. You spot the final move. Mate. A whisper of joy flickers through you, not loud but full, because sometimes the best games are the ones you never play. Just solve. Dusk rolls in like a soft woolen blanket, draping the countryside in a hush of golden violet. You follow the curve of an old stone path up a hillside toward a cluster of slate-roofed buildings surrounded by tall hedgerows. It's quiet, almost reverent. and for good reason. You've reached a place where chess was played not for glory, nor for gold, but for pride wrapped in silence, a monastery known less for its psalms and more for its pawn structure. Inside its weathered cloisters, time slows. You step beneath an archway where ivy clings to ancient mortar, and the echo of footsteps tells you you're not alone. You round a corner, and there, under a low colonnade, two monks sit cross-legged, facing each other across a stone slab table carved with the faded geometry of a chessboard. Neither speaks. You recognize that look, the furrowed brow, the slow hand hovering above a bishop, the twitch of a robe hem when a pawn is nudged forward. This is more than pastime, this is rivalry, a quiet one certainly, but fierce in its stillness. One monk scratches his chin, the other pretends not to notice. You've walked into the middle of something that's been going on for years. Yes, monasteries had rivalries, often about everything except faith. Gardening technique, hymn tempo, goat ownership, and, you learn tonight, chess. These weren't flamboyant battles, no insults, no wagers, just move after move, played over decades, with grudges held so gently they were practically blessings. You take a seat on a nearby bench, careful not to disturb the peace. A younger novice sits beside you and leans in. "They've been playing the same match for 3 months, he whispers. 1 move a day before breakfast. You blink. Is it the same match? Oh yes, the novice nods solemnly. Brother Allard refuses to take his bishop, says it's a trap. Brother Pierron says it's not. Been saying that since Candlemas. You stifle a chuckle. Historians still debate whether these monastic match marathons were deliberate devotion or simply stubbornness wrapped in wool cloaks. But there's no denying the passion behind them. One letter from a 14th century monk reads, "I cannot confess this week, for my heart is full of wrath at Brother Eustace's, Queen's, side pawn." We've all been there. Some monasteries even kept ledgers of running games. You glimpse one in a scriptoria, an ink-stained volume titled Tabulae Bellorum, Tables of Wars, that chronicles a series of matches between 2 abbots from rival priories. Each entry is annotated with commentary like Move 47, unwise, possibly in anger, or Bishop moved unnecessarily, pride may be involved. You wander now into the refectory where simple meals are eaten in silence, unless someone is playing. At the far end, 2 elderly monks sit over a travel board. The pieces are hand-carved, well-worn. They move with the kind of slowness only the truly invested can achieve. One reaches for a pawn, then pulls back. The other clears his throat, a statement louder than words, a quirky tidbit. In one particularly rigid order, monks were only allowed to play chess on Fridays, after fish, before vespers. They played wearing gloves to avoid excessive emotion. Another abbey, more lenient, allowed Sunday matches, but only if both players agreed to recite psalms after each capture. Try quoting scripture every time you fork a rook and a king. You find a hidden alcove in the garden where a small bench overlooks a simple board carved directly into a stone slab. 2 pieces are set out, just a king and a knight. The rest are missing. A game half finished, a metaphor for patience, or perhaps a practice board for monks who preferred to think 3 moves ahead while weeding the cabbage rows. The silence here is not empty. It hums with old tension, old peace, and something like admiration. These rivalries weren't toxic, they were sacred, a test of humility, a mirror of obedience. You don't gloat when you win, you don't sulk when you lose. You simply nod, bow your head, and begin again. The sun slips lower, casting honey gold light through the archways as you pass through the cloister walk one last time. The two monks from earlier still sit, unmoved, as if carved from the same stone as the colonnade. And then, with excruciating slowness, Brother Allard moves his bishop. Gasps from nearby. Brother Pierron narrows his eyes. He moves his queen. Check. The novice beside you sighs, and now it begins again. You smile, because in these cloistered walls chess is not a game. It is a discipline, a devotion, a slow-burning rivalry built not on anger, but on respect, both for the game and for the person who dares to play it beside you for a lifetime. You leave the cloistered silence behind and make your way into a bustling town square, its cobblestones slick from an earlier rain. Lanterns swing from iron hooks. Vendors shout half-heartedly as they begin to pack up. And in the fading light of late afternoon, something unexpected captures your attention. A chessboard, set right in the middle of the square. It's chalked directly onto the stones, faint, uneven, already smudged from passing feet. But the pieces, they're real. Simple wood carvings, slightly mismatched. Two boys play while an older man watches nearby, offering occasional suggestions between bites of a pear. This isn't a noble court or a monastery or a smoky tavern. This is everyone else's chess. Open air, daylight, no velvet cushions, just pure strategy, offered up for free to anyone with the time and the temperament. You sit on the edge of a low fountain and observe as the game unfolds. One boy moves quickly, too quickly. The other, slower, more deliberate, chews his lip as he nudges his queen forward. A tiny crowd gathers, a tanner's apprentice, a girl with a basket of eggs, a one-eyed dog, possibly named Bishop. This is what happened when chess went truly public. By the 15th century, the game had spilled into the streets. No longer the domain of Latin speakers and tax collectors, it became a favorite of cobblers, scribes, innkeepers, and fishermen. Historians still argue whether this democratization dulled the game or saved it from extinction. You suspect the answer is both and neither. You stroll past a smithy where a rough table has been set up out front. The blacksmith, still in apron and soot, plays a match against the local grain merchant. Their board is scorched at the edges, possibly from a forge fire or a particularly passionate endgame. "I told you not to open with your bishop," the smith grumbles. "You told me that last time and I won," replies the merchant. You nod. The argument is older than the board itself. Further down the lane, a group of girls is drawing boards with charcoal on the street. They use stones for pawns, bits of broken ceramic for bishops. Their laughter rings out as one of them declares checkmate with theatrical flair. One quirky detail. In some towns, chalk chessboards became so common that ordinances had to be passed to prevent people from sketching them in front of shop doors. Customers trip over knights, one grumpy shopkeeper wrote in a petition from Norwich. Also, I suspect they cheat. You pass a tavern where a pair of travelling musicians are mid-game. One strums a lute between moves, the other hums. They're composing a song about chess, equal parts love ballad and cautionary tale. You catch a line. She played her knight like a dagger and left me with just my king. It's better than expected. The public game brought with it a new kind of challenge, distraction. With children running through, geese honking and the occasional overturned barrel, concentration was a skill hard won. But the street players adapted. One man wears a wide hat with a sign pinned to it. "Do not speak to me unless you see my queen." You find a bench beside an old woman, her cane resting across her knees. She watches a game in silence, then leans over to you and whispers, "That lad always forgets about the left flank. Watch." Sure enough, his rook is snatched. Moments later, you glance sideways at her. "How long have you played?" you ask. She smiles. "Since my teeth came in, lost a bishop the same day." You both chuckle quietly. She hands you a boiled sweet and resumes watching. The game continues, time stretches, and here's the beauty of it. No one here is ranked. No one's publishing treatises. There are no scribes, no ledgers, no tournaments or titles. Just people playing, sometimes to win, sometimes to learn, sometimes because there's just nothing better to do on a Tuesday evening when the bread's gone cold and the rain hasn't yet returned. You rise and walk once more through the square. Everywhere you look, boards, half-played games, abandoned positions, strange openings, forgotten strategies. It's chaos, really, but it's joyful chaos. And chess, once the guarded jewel of noblemen and scholars, has finally become what it was always meant to be. A common thread, a quiet language spoken across class and dialect, a way to think out loud with your hands. You pause to look down at one last game before night swallows the square. It's etched into the dirt. One pawn is missing. The king is tipped slightly sideways. No one's playing. And yet the board waits, patient, open, and ready. You step away, heart full. Because this game, this simple, silent war of black and white, no longer belongs to the powerful. It belongs to everyone. The moon is climbing now, casting silver light over empty fields and forgotten footpaths as you follow a winding trail out of the village. There's a stillness in the air, a hush so complete you feel it in your bones. Somewhere beyond the hedgerow an owl hoots once, and then the night belongs to you alone. Your feet find a rhythm, and before long you arrive at what once was a grand manor. Its outer walls crumble slightly at the corners. Ivy overtakes the stone, and the wooden shutters hang crooked, but the past clings to this place like perfume on old lace. You step inside. No one greets you, but the drawing room remains untouched by time. A table at the center bears the unmistakable form of a chessboard carved directly into its surface. It gleams in the candlelight, polished obsessively, edges smoothed by 100 years of fingers and forearms. The pieces are set, white to move, but there's no one here. And yet you sense something. Stories, lingering like dust motes in the slanting light. This was a house where chess once meant everything. The records say so, the de Morville family, minor nobility with a major obsession. Over 3 generations, chess became their defining trait. Matches were chronicled in journals, positions analyzed in the margins of prayer books, children learned openings before Latin. Tutors were dismissed for poor endgame technique. One governess famously lasted less than a week after calling the Queen's movement a touch aggressive. Historians still argue whether the de Maurivilles were simply eccentric or part of a larger cultural shift, when chess stopped being merely fashionable and became a legacy, a marker of intellect, lineage, and, in their case, barely contained madness. You walk the length of the room and see portraits lining the walls, lords, ladies, children, all seated, all posing next to the same chessboard. One holds a knight in his palm, smirking. Another has a pawn between her fingers, painted with eerie detail. The child in the far portrait? He's knocked his king over entirely. Quirky fact, the de Maureville heir in 1442 refused to marry anyone who couldn't beat him in 3 out of 5 matches. He died unmarried at 46. His sister, however, quietly bested 5 suitors, married the one who gave her a good game and a good bottle of wine, and became the estate's chess champion for the next 3 decades. You find her journal on a nearby shelf. It's leather-worn, its edges cracked. You open it gently and read, "This morning I defeated my brother with a pawn sacrifice. He sulked into supper and refused the salt. Victory is its own seasoning." You grin. Some things never change. Later entries take a darker turn. Notes on gambits, diagrams of unsolved puzzles. Then, "No one will play me anymore. The pieces are tired of waiting. Perhaps I'll switch sides mid-game." You set the journal down and return to the table. You study the position. It's late in the game, few pieces remain, but someone left this match, deliberately you suspect, unfinished. A signature. You lift a knight and move it to f6. Check. No applause, no groans, just silence. The fall of families like this one mirrored the fading of chess's elite mystique. As the world modernized, new entertainments arrived. Card games, theatre, dice, public debates. The slow, contemplative rhythm of chess began to seem old-fashioned, less dramatic, as profitable. Bit by bit, the game was edged out from noble salons and manor halls. The pieces collected dust. The boards were forgotten in drawers. Some were sold, others burned for firewood. One infamous matchbook was repurposed as insulation in a barn, but chess never disappeared. It just slipped into quieter corners, taverns, streets, schools, and eventually far down the road back into parlours, but now as a curiosity, a relic, a reminder of a time when the fate of dinner plans hinged on the outcome of a bishop's move. You close your eyes for a moment, sitting at the table. You imagine the de Maureville daughter sitting here by candlelight, calculating lines no one else saw. You hear the faint echo of her opponent's voice. You picture the moment just before checkmate. The thrill, the silence. The pieces wait. You rise. As you step out into the cool air again, you feel the house behind you sigh softly. A century of games, moves, rivals, all sleeping now, but never gone. Because even if the players leave the board remembers. You descend once more into the world, following a soft trail lit only by moonlight and the occasional flicker of torch from a distant tower. The air smells of hay and hearth smoke, the world settling in for sleep. You walk quietly now, not because anyone will hear you, but because it feels like the right thing to do. Somewhere nearby, a game is ending. You step through an open doorway into a humble cottage, warmed by a central hearth. An old man and a young girl sit on opposite sides of a small table. Between them, the simplest chess set you've seen so far. Coins for pawns, pebbles for bishops, a carved bit of firewood for a king. And yet the way they stare at it, you'd think it was solid gold. "You move," the man says gently. The girl blinks slowly, then shifts a stone forward. She grins. "Check." He blinks, caught. "Well played," he mutters, then tips his king with a crooked smile. Again. They begin to reset. And you realize this is how the game survives, not in dusty books or royal halls, but in small, warm places where stories are shared between generations. You move outside into the silence of the village lane. Somewhere, far off, a church bell chimes once. You follow the sound into a memory of everything you've seen. Monks playing in shadows, merchants shouting over spilled ale, nobles scheming beneath rose-draped balconies, bishops arguing rules, travelling masters vanishing into mist. You recall the laughter, the sighs, the silence after checkmate, and you remember the final, persistent truth. There is always a next game. Chess never truly ends, it only resets. like history, like sleep, like the stories we carry with us when no one else is watching. You pause beneath a great oak at the edge of the road and gaze upward. The stars blink down in their ancient grid, and for a moment you imagine the sky itself as a chessboard. Kings and knights written in constellations, bishops arcing across the heavens, queens flaring through time, and under it all, the quiet ones. The players who didn't seek glory or coin, who never published a single move, who simply sat down and played, again and again, for the love of the board and the rhythm of thought. You take one last deep breath. A soft breeze rustles the leaves, and somewhere far behind you a pawn is nudged forward, the first move of another quietly legendary game. And now, dear listener, let yourself settle. You've walked far tonight, through stone courtyards, candlelit abbeys, smoky taverns, and sun-washed town squares. You've leaned over boards worn smooth by generations, followed knights as they leapt across time, and watched queens rise from quiet corners to rule the board. The world of medieval chess was never truly loud. It was a hum beneath history, a whispered duel, a study in patience, a place where strategy met silence, and where victory never had to shout. So as your breathing slows, picture that final match once more, the hush before the first move, the soft clack of wood on wood, the steady rhythm of thought, measured, calm, and just a little mysterious. Outside your window now, the world rests in checkmate's gentle shadow. The night wraps itself around your thoughts like a velvet cloak, cool and still. And in the quiet spaces between words you might just hear the echo of a rook sliding forward, or the sigh of a player laying down their king, not in defeat, but in peace. This is your board now, your match, and your rest. There's no need to calculate anymore, no need to anticipate the next move. Just breathe. You're safe, you're warm, and you're exactly where you need to be. Let the board fade, let the pieces drift away. Sleep, gentle strategist. You've played beautifully.